What's good? It's Woog. I wanted to react to the Virgil Ortiz Jr. versus Frederick Lawson fight and to the Golden Boy card overall, namely the next two fights down. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the fight between Arnold Barbosa and Ndong Jenny. Ndong Jenny was just totally outmatched. I figured that was going to be the case going in. Arnold Barbosa just signed with Golden Boy after being with Top Rank for some time, couldn't secure any of the meaningful big fights there. Although he does have wins over Jose Pedraza. He beat Danielito Zorrilla, the guy who Prograis struggled against. Well, at least struggled against before getting dominated by Devin Haney. And Arnold Barbosa's beaten Alex Salcedo and Antonio Moran. And Antonio Moran was Devin Haney's highlight reel knockout. And more recently, Antonio Moran actually gave Jermaine Ortiz a very difficult fight. That kind of went under the radar. But look at Jermaine Ortiz's recent fight against Antonio Moran. That was the fight that had me thinking, damn, maybe Jermaine Ortiz needs to go up to 140. Maybe this weight cut is really doing him some harm. He got hurt a couple times pretty badly against Moran. He ended up winning the fight, but, Jermaine Ortiz is about to go against Teofimo Lopez, and I think that fight against Moran is worth watching. But yeah, between Salcedo, Moran, Danielito Zorrilla, Jose Pedraza, Arnold Barbosa's fought some pretty decent fighters, and he's looking like a very good fighter. Hopefully, now that he's on Golden Boy, he could secure some meaningful fights. And outside of what they have going on right now in this, and this is going to lead me to the next fight between Ohara Davies and Ismael Baroso. I mean, you want to talk about a stunner. But yeah, hopefully with Golden Boy, Arnold Barbosa, and he did end up getting a stoppage over Ndong Jenny. It was an 8th round TKO. But outside of, the guys in this little parlay, Davies, who just got knocked out in the first round by Ismael Barroso. I mean, look, I did a 1-minute video on that one. I picked Davies to get the late stoppage. I did make note that Davies' only other 2 losses were against Southpaws. They were to Josh Taylor via stoppage and to Jack Catterall via decision. But I thought that the age would come into play. I thought that maybe Ismael Barroso had his final stand, his last stand in that impressive performance with the controversial stoppage against Raleigh Romero. I thought maybe that was the last of, Ismael Barroso being at or near his best, but apparently not. He knocked Ohara Davies out in the first round. But with Barbosa, I'm wondering, outside of Davies and Barroso, who else does Golden Boy really have to offer at 140? Well, that question might be answered with this interview that took place on this card between fights, and it was with Jose Ramirez, who has just signed with Golden Boy. So not only did they sign Ohara Davies, who again got obliterated in the first round, basically never recovered from the first straight left hand he walked into at the hands of Baroso. And you want to talk about a disappointing debut with your new promoter. I mean, I saw Golden Boy or Oscar De La Hoya tweets going out basically saying, our next future star, Ohara Davies. So I'm under the impression Golden Boy was expecting Ohara Davies to beat the 41-year-old, or at least 41 in a couple weeks, Ismael Baroso. Well, Baroso had other plans, clearly. But yeah, Golden Boy also signed Jose Ramirez. So what does that mean? Jose Ramirez, ever since he fought that battle for undisputed with Josh Taylor, has only had 2 fights. He beat Jose Pedraza, and then he stopped Richard Comey. So he fought once in 2022, because that fight against Josh Taylor was like August of 2021. He being Jose Ramirez, fought once in 2022, once in 2023. So he hasn't been active, and the fights that, that fight fans have been wanting to see him in, at the time we wanted to see him against Regis Prograis, that fight didn't happen. He looks like he's at the stage of his career. He's 31 years old right now. But if you listen to him in interviews, he's been saying this for a couple years. He's been wanting the bigger money fights. He sees himself as a bigger money fighter. So he's looking at who? Ryan Garcia, I'm sure, probably Teofimo Lopez, although I don't think Teofimo was super interested in fighting him. I don't know that to be the case, but they were both with Top Rank, Teo and Jose Ramirez, and they never got it on. So I'm assuming that Teofimo didn't have great interest in fighting Jose Ramirez, especially after Teofimo Lopez beat Josh Taylor. who is still the only guy to have officially beaten Jose Ramirez, even though Jose Zepeda fought a very close fight with Ramirez. So is Ramirez and Barbosa going to be an upcoming fight? I wouldn't expect that to be the case because, again, if you're looking for big money fights, big names, and you're Jose Ramirez, Arnold Barbosa doesn't meet those requirements. He's the guy who is high risk, lower reward. I mean, hardcore fight fans know that Barbosa appears to be pretty good, but, casual fight fans and people who aren't totally plugged in, they don't really know about Arnold Barbosa. So let's think about this for a second. If Ishmael Baroso just stopped, again, I couldn't be happier for the guy. I mean, people often joke about how old he looks, and he does look older than 41 years old. And, he used to look pretty ripped. He doesn't look super ripped anymore. He just looks like a old fighter. And I thought he was going to get beaten to the punch. I thought he was going to get beaten round over round. I thought he was going to have a spirited effort, maybe win a couple rounds, but I thought that he was going to wilt under the sharper punching of Ohara Davies. Again, none of this ended up being the case. First round knockout for Ishmael Baroso. So if you are to believe Golden Boy that they are going to stick to the script and that this WBA or the path of the WBA 140-pound title is going to take shape in its current belt holder, Rolly Romero, fighting the winner of Davies Baroso, now we know that to be Ishmael Baroso, then the next WBA title fight is supposed to be against or between Rolly Romero, the current champ, versus Ishmael Baroso, the current interim champ, because that's what this Davies Baroso fight was supposed to be for, the interim WBA title. So the first wild card here is we don't know Rolly Romero's health status. We don't even know what's been wrong with him. We just know he hasn't been able to get back into the ring since that fight with Baroso. So if Rolly Romero is now healthy, is it still supposed to be Romero versus Baroso in a rematch for that WBA title? Well, enter the elephant in the room, the biggest star of them all, Ryan Garcia, right? Ryan Garcia was talking like he was, they were talking like they were going to work out a Devin Haney versus Ryan Garcia fight, which I would have loved to have seen. I mean, they've been talking about that fight happening, not happening for years. I mean, back when Devin Haney held the WBC belt at lightweight, Ryan Garcia was his mandatory opponent, but wasn't interested in fighting for that WBC lightweight title. This is when Ryan Garcia was on some, the titles don't matter. I want to fight Tank Davis. I want the money, he just wasn't about that championship fight life. Well, he just tweeted out that he's no longer pursuing a fight with Devin Haney and that he's going to be pursuing Rolly Romero. So does he have intel that others don't in terms of if Rolly Romero is healthy to fight? Because if that really is what Ryan Garcia wants, I do think that boxing will kind of bend at the will of one of its superstars. And I'm saying superstar, even though Ryan Garcia hasn't been the A-side on a series of pay-per-view fights. I mean, even Garcia's last fight against Oscar Duarte was on DAZN, non-pay-per-view. But in terms of name recognition, I'm calling him a star. You could even say superstar, name recognition wise. Well, if he really wants to fight Rolly Romero, I could see that fight happening, and I could see Ishmael Baroso getting screwed out of the title shot next. But we'll see what the WBA does, because if they're going to hold true to their own laws, which, I mean, they sometimes do, sometimes don't, like the WBC, sometimes do, sometimes don't. But again, 1, is Rolly Romero okay to fight? 2, if he is okay to fight, is he going to fight Baroso or is he going to fight Ryan Garcia? If he fights Baroso and they clear up that WBA title, WBA interim, and they unify that, right, between Romero and Baroso, does Ryan Garcia fight either Jose Ramirez or maybe Arnold Barbosa? So now you've got a few more players in the mix with Golden Boy, right? Even though Rolly Romero isn't technically, he's not a Golden Boy fighter. If anything, he's been fighting on PBC his last several fights. But so this is kind of how 140 is configured, at least in terms of what the WBA landscape is. You've got Ryan Garcia, who's going to either fight Rolly Romero or probably somebody else on Golden Boy, unless they make some sort of a crossover promotional super fight. Maybe Teofimo Lopez, if he gets past Jermaine Ortiz, maybe Teofimo Lopez versus Ryan Garcia. I would love to see that. But assuming that there's no Golden Boy cross promotional efforts with, Devin Haney or Subriel Matias or, Regis Prograis, even though Prograis just lost his title to Devin Haney, Richardson Hitchens versus Jack Catterall. That's about to be next. And that's going to be an IBF title eliminator. So theoretically, the winner of Hitchens and Catterall is supposed to be fighting IBF champion Subriel Matias. So that's taking place on that side. And then you've got Gary Antoine Russell, who just doesn't fight enough. He's a very talented, or apparently a very talented fighter. He's got a stoppage win over Rancis Barthelemy. I believe Gary Antoine Russell is the only guy to have stopped Victor Postal. That was a very impressive stoppage win for Gary Antoine Russell. And correction, there was one other guy to have stopped Postal. It was in his very latest fight, July of 2023. Elvis Rodriguez stopped Victor Postal. So now Victor Postal has been stopped twice, but Gary Antoine Russell was the first to stop Victor Postal. So he's a PBC fighter. I don't know what's going to happen with him next. And then you've got Sandor Martin, who's still hanging around. He's won twice since that controversial split decision loss to Teofimo Lopez. Many, including myself, thought that Sandor Martin should have edged that decision. That's Sandor Martin's only loss. And again, he's got 2 stoppages after that against lesser tier fighters. So we'll see how that's going to shape up on the Sandor Martin side. But yeah, I really wonder if Rolly Romero is going to be fighting Ryan Garcia or if he's going to be fighting Ishmael Barroso, who just knocked out Ohara Davies in the first round. That was very stunning. Again, I couldn't be happier for Ishmael Barroso in the wake of that super controversial stoppage where Tony Weeks stopped that Ishmael Barroso versus Rolly Romero fight in a fight that Ishmael Barroso appeared to be winning, even though he had gotten dropped, or something that he got kind of pushed down. But I thought he was hurt. He just wasn't badly enough hurt to have gotten stopped. Because if you're gonna give him a lesser leash than you would give other fighters, why even sanction him and license him to fight? You know what I mean? Either you do let him fight and he fights with the same rights, basically with the same rights as other fighters, or you don't allow him to fight at all. But don't allow him to fight and then stop the fight at the first sign of him taking any real damage because he's an older fighter. That just isn't equitable. You know what I mean? But yeah, Ishmael Barroso picked up a big win against Ohara Davies. And now let's talk a bit about the main event. Vergil Ortiz Jr. versus Frederick Lawson. There's not too much I can really glean from this first round, seemingly early stoppage by Tony Weeks. I mean, look, I was looking at Tony Weeks' face when he stopped this one, and I knew when he heard the boos, he had to be thinking, oh boy, not again. Because Vergil Ortiz Jr., and I hope I didn't say Victor Ortiz, but Vergil Ortiz Jr. started letting his hands go in the first round against Frederick Lawson. It looked like Frederick Lawson kind of walked into a left hand, and it was a left jab that kind of caught Lawson like in the side of the neck area. You saw Lawson take kind of an awkward step back, and then you saw Vergil Ortiz come forward and start letting both hands go. And one thing about Vergil Ortiz, at least at 147, he was one of the most ferocious and vicious punchers in the sport. He's got a 100% knockout ratio to this day. So he started letting his hands go, and Lawson had his back against the ropes. For a moment, I thought Lawson looked like he was sliding down the ropes and it was about to go down. But then he looked like he started kind of propping himself back up posture-wise off the ropes. And it was at that moment, after sliding down and then kind of coming back up, keeping the bunny ears, the high guard, which Vergil Ortiz was punching around and kind of punching through. I don't know how many were landing super cleanly, but again, he was letting both of his hands go. But again, I thought I saw Lawson slide down and then kind of come back up. And I was wondering, is this a part of the plan? Does he have any plan to survive beyond this barrage? And then Tony Weeks stopped the fight. So it looked early. It did look early. I think I heard on the broadcast that they said that Tony Weeks said that he saw Lawson's eyes roll back. Now, if he saw that, then he saw what he saw. I've got no problem with the stoppage. I don't, I'm going to take Tony Weeks at his word. All I know is he has been the referee over some controversially early, seemingly early. I'm not the authority here, so I'm saying seemingly early stoppages. I'm going to take him at his word that he saw the eyes go back. You know what I mean? I'm going to say, okay, if Tony Weeks said that he saw the eyes go back, I believe that he saw his eyes go back. But if he didn't see those eyes go back and he stopped the fight when he did, it looked like an early stoppage. But what can we gather from this very limited sample size of Virgil Ortiz Jr. at 154? Well, the biggest thing of note for me was that he looks like a totally different guy. Like, I remember when Mikey Garcia had that long layoff because of his contractual dispute. He came back, and Mikey Garcia at the time, he had been like a former 126-pound champ, 130-pound champ. When he came back with a different body type. He looked a little more muscular. He looked a little bit bulkier. Mikey Garcia was a string bean. He was a skinny guy early in his career. Virgil Ortiz was that, he had that wiry, that lean build, which just made the leverage that he was getting into a lot of those left hooks to the body and those overhand rights and even those jabs. He looked like a different guy. And now he looks like he's got more mass, more meat on his shoulders, his biceps, his torso, his belly, his whole body just looks like he's got more weight. He doesn't look like a slim guy anymore. I mean, even Jermell Charlo, remember when he fought Canelo? He came in looking different. Usually we're used to seeing Jermell Charlo look super lean. He looked muscular and bulkier against Canelo Alvarez. So I don't know what this means in terms of Virgil Ortiz Jr.'s viability at 154. I think he's going to be a hard puncher. I think he's going to be able to absorb some damage. I don't know how much damage. I've seen him hurt against Mean Machine. I saw him even look like he got a little stunned against Maurice Hooker in that fight before the Mean Machine fight. So I am more certain about Virgil Ortiz's offensive effectiveness at 154 and how that's going to scale up. I mean, I'm not going to make too much of this first round stoppage. I mean, going into the fight, I thought Lawson was going to give him some rounds. I thought he was going to be durable enough to take the fight into like maybe the middle rounds. But I didn't think this was going to be an ultra competitive fight in terms of Lawson actually like winning rounds or anything like that. So there's not too much to make other than, again, Virgil Ortiz has a different body type, period, at 154. I don't know if he's going to be able to lean out again. I mean, he's in his mid-20s. Often you don't see guys start bulking up into their late 20s, maybe even early 30s. I thought that Virgil Ortiz was going to be, of the wiry type for a few more years. So I was a little bit surprised to see him look a little bit stockier. I don't know what that's going to mean at 154, where you've got a lot more guys who are taller than Virgil Ortiz than you have who are shorter than Virgil Ortiz. Whereas at 147, Virgil Ortiz was one of the taller fighters in the division. Again, he's about the same height as Errol Spence. So I don't know how Virgil Ortiz is going to do against a 6-footer with a good jab. And, similar to how I was saying, I don't know what they're going to do, who they're going to match like Arnold Barbosa up with it because he's on Golden Boy. Golden Boy doesn't have a deep stable at 154. So this is going to likely require some cross-promotional efforts. Like if you look at the 154 landscape, you almost have to work with PBC in order to get into the mix at 154. So, I mean, I hope for Virgil's sake that Oscar is talking with PBC right now to explore some of those matchups. I mean, Virgil Ortiz he respectfully called out Tim Tszyu. Boy, if only we could be so lucky as fight fans, right? I mean, look, if Jermell Charlo versus Tim Tszyu doesn't happen, and that's the fight that I want to see. I want to see Jermell Charlo, if he's able to come back to 154 to fight Tim Tszyu. That's unresolved. That's pretty much the next guy at 154 who's been unaddressed by Jermell Charlo, the undisputed champion. Jermell Charlo hasn't defended his undisputed status since becoming undisputed in that rematch against Brian Castano. And by the way, you can see a picture with Virgil Ortiz and Brian Castano where Virgil Ortiz is taller than one of the shorter fighters in that division, Brian Castano. But yeah, Jermell Charlo versus Tim Tszyu is the fight that I want to see. But if we don't get that, I would love to see Virgil Ortiz versus Tim Tszyu. I mean, might that be too early for Virgil Ortiz at 154? Tim Tszyu's been looking like a terror, right? But, you know, even if it's not Tim Tszyu, I would like to see Virgil Ortiz against Erickson Lubin, Jesus Ramos, Brian Mendoza, Sebastian Fundora. That's an interesting matchup. And, I mean, obviously, Jermell Charlo. I would love to see Jermell Charlo versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. Jermell Charlo now only holds 2 of the belts, with Tim Tszyu holding the WBO belt, and then the IBF title is going to be up for grabs in a vacant title fight between Bakram Murtazaliev and Jack Kulke. They're going to be fighting for the IBF title. So the only 2 that Jermell Charlo still has are WBC and WBA. But yeah, I want to see how Golden Boy navigates Virgil Ortiz Jr. because I was wondering how they were going to navigate his 147 career. We saw that they were at least able to, on paper, make the fight with Stanionis. The fight never materialized because of each fighter's, but especially Virgil Ortiz Jr.'s health issues. So stay tuned. Let's see how they match Virgil Ortiz going forward. Again, they almost have to work with PBC to really get in the mix against some of these elite and near elite 154 guys. But, you know, first and foremost, I just hope that Virgil Ortiz is able to string together a series of healthy fights over the next year to 2 years. I just want to see him be able to get on a roll and get some activity going. He said he wants to fight like 4 times or 3 more times in 2024. Let's first see, you know, when they schedule his next fight and who that next fight is going to be against. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What did you think about each one of these fights? Ortiz versus Lawson. What did you think about the early stoppage? What did you think about that shocking knockout of Ohara Davies at the hands of Ishmael Barroso? And what do you think about Arnold Barbosa and how Golden Boy is going to navigate his career? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.